I just hate it when I don't act like my true self. There are so many times where I will react because of emotion, and then later I'll be embarrassed. Like, why did I act that way? I'm so humiliated. I was so immature, so emotional. I remember one time when I was in my 20s, I was married, I was a professional, I was, graduated college, and I was with my husband somewhere, and something he said upset me, and I just threw the phone down. Just threw it right there on the table, and everybody saw me do it. And I thought about that for years later and just cringed, like, why did I respond like that? Why don't I react so immaturely, even as an adult? Almost like I was having a temper tantrum, right? As an adult temper tantrum. And so there are these times when we respond out of character in an immature way. And it comes out of nowhere. Like, we have no idea it was coming. All of a sudden it's there, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. And then we're humiliated afterward because of this. My name is Monica Maurer. I am a licensed therapist and supervisor. I'm also the director of the Center for Transformation. And at the CFT Institute, we exist to partner with therapists to help therapists enhance personal growth that leads to professional outcomes. There are things that we do at the CFT Institute that really help therapists grow in their identity as therapists personally, and it will have direct impact on therapists becoming their professional best. And so that's what we're all about. That's what we're excited about doing. And the topic for today's episode is maturity, because we partner with Life Model Works to present the life model as our journey toward growth and maturity. The life model is a model that was developed as early as the 80s, and really hyper developed more in the 90s, and now is coming to us in the early 2000s as a way of growing personally that really can impact us in every relationship that we have in our life, including our families, our family members, and then also in the way that we relate to our clients and how we can bring clients into a more healthy frame of mind themselves. And how can we help them grow unless we grow? And so the life model has several aspects to it that are very detailed, and there's a lot there, but I want to attempt to break those things down in this episode and in the upcoming episodes. In the last episode, we talked about Immanuel presence, learning to live in God's presence and learning to find your identity in terms of how God sees you, because you're living in that positive reflection of His grace and love on a continual basis. And so there's a lot of growth that can be had there. And today's episode is going to be about maturity and what it means to mature, and how the life model sets out some understanding for us that's super helpful in learning about how to grow in maturity for ourselves personally, and then how to lead others in that. So the first thing that I will mention about maturity today is that there is a maturity growth checklist and a chart, and the chart mimics, if you're familiar in Psychology 101, all of us learned about Erik Erikson's stages of development. Well, the life model developmental chart mimics an Eriksonian style, and it also includes information from our biblical understanding. So it's neurotheology. It's kind of blending all that, as well as the most current neuro research, to understand how the brain develops and what's needed at each stage of development. So we go through infant, child, adult, parent, and elder stages, and just understand what we need at each stage, what happens when we get what we need versus what happens when we don't get what we need. And that's really where a maturity gets complicated. If we matured perfectly throughout our lives, we would grow at the same rate of our age, and our maturity would match that, and we would grow it into mature elders by the time our youngest child is 13. and we would be, contributing to community at a high level. But in our culture, we have an epidemic of a lack of mature elders, because even though we're growing in age, we are not growing in maturity. We have what's called maturity gaps in our development, where we are continuing to grow in age, but we have missed some major markers in the infant stage, the child stage, the adult stage. And so when it comes to being parents or elders to the community, we find that we can't really navigate that successfully, because even though we might be pseudo elders or pseudo parents where we can be that often, we will have moments happen, like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, where all of a sudden we will have a temper tantrum or a maturity gap where we won't act like ourselves. We'll be selfish, self-indulgent, temper tantrum-y, like I like to say, and then we don't reflect our true level of maturity. And it's a travesty, because it is shaming for ourselves. It's humiliating, because here I am, living out my life, a professional in the community, and then all of a sudden throwing a temper tantrum with my husband throwing the phone on the ground. Like, it's ridiculous, but it's what happens when these gaps show up in our life, and it's oftentimes when we least expect them. And so we have to learn, we have to start to understand, and the life model gives us a strategy for understanding, where are my gaps? Why are they there? And what do I need to do about them? How do I fill in these developmental gaps so I can access my highest level of maturity, rather than, just falling into a lower level of maturity when I'm not acting, when something doesn't go my way, and then I can't act like my true identity. I act like a younger version of myself, even an infant sometimes. And so it's something to think about in terms of gaps, maturity gaps. Where did they come from? How did they get there? What do I do about them? And what's the strategy for filling in those gaps so that I can really access being who I want to be, being my true identity, acting like my best self on a regular basis. So this is a major part of the life model, is understanding maturity growth, what blocks it, and what to do about it. And so a couple more aspects that I will include on this episode is just an understanding that really blows my mind, that we are not valued based on our maturity. Now, in our culture, we do value people more based on their maturity. We all obviously value infants very much, and they don't have to be mature, but that's because they look their age. But when we have a 25-year-old acting like an infant, or a 75-year-old acting like an infant, we don't value that. We actually devalue that in our minds, and we think, well, that person has problems, or they're annoying, they're difficult, they don't deserve to be a part of this community because of how they're acting. They don't belong to us. We are not their people because of how they're acting, because we really value people based on their ability to be mature, their ability to behave in certain ways. And that is not the way that God does it. And that, I think, is a mind blower for a lot of us. It challenges us, because we tend to think, I say, well, look at Billy Graham. He was amazing, and he did so many things for God, and he really lived out his maturity, really an elder to the community, and we value his life because we see how his life did so much for others. But then when we look at someone who has made a lot of mistakes, maybe landed themselves in prison or hurt a lot of people in their life, we think, well, they're not valuable. They're a menace to society. And that is just not the way God sees it. God does not value us based on our maturity. And if we have the character of God, if we're growing the character of God, we value others based on their existence and not their maturity. And we just can't do that. As humans, that's not a thing that we do well because of our own maturity gaps. If our gaps were filled in and we truly had elder level maturity, we're going to be tender to people's weaknesses. We're not going to devalue their existence because of their maturity, no matter their age and the level of gaps. And that, I think, is really missing in our culture, because we're not loving others with agape love, with hesed love, with with love that never gives up. We're loving people conditionally based on their behavior, and that's just not going to change anything. That's not going to help anyone or change anything. It's radical love is a love that loves beyond behavior, that can see the true identity in people and call that out, and that includes ourselves. We want to value ourselves not based on our behavior, but because we truly are children of God, that we are loved by God, that we exist on this earth for a unique purpose. And sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we have gaps, but we want to be tender to our own weaknesses, realizing we're not valued based on what we do or don't do. We are just valued, period. It is a super hard concept, very hard to digest. And as therapists, we need to be able to digest this concept so we can give it to others. And so the final point today is this idea that we are not valued based on our maturity, yet it is a valuable thing to grow in maturity. Because when we actually grow in maturity, we're able to do more effective work to help culture, to help our society to grow and actualize and get to a higher level of creating belonging around us and around our communities so that everyone can heal. And so we're more effective when we mature, but not more valuable. And so that's the final point that I'll make today, that we want to mature because it's effective, because we're joining in the work of God, because when we mature, we're able to do more. We're more free in our emotions. We're more free to love and be loved and experience joyful community. And it's a wonderful thing. So the task today is to really understand the concept of maturity, and really dig in and pursue more of a life model understanding of maturity so that we can all grow together and really become all that we are created to be on this earth. So I look forward to talking to you in the next episode where we will break down the 19 brain skills, and it will be a good one as well. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.